All right, my babies. All right, so I want to discuss, I think, two notes. I'm going to try to merge them with one. The one is I'm going to start with the story of my village. And, uh, and my village has had a name and now has another name. And so the story goes like this. It's Al Fasaqin. Now the Arabic, like in Arabic, we have a couple of different like letters. One is qa, 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 qa. We say it from here, qa, kind of like squeeze our apple throat. Qa. Yeah, we squeeze our throat and we kind of like push in a weird way. Anyways, I understand that the first step in actually learning a new language is getting over I forgot what the guy calls it, but the guy like speaks about it beautifully. It's like the first step is you have to kind of like immerse yourself in the language in order for your ears to kind of get used to the different like sounds that the language does and how they combine together. And that way, then the words start kind of like splitting apart, and the spaces you start like hearing more. It stops becoming gibberish. But so the reason I want to mention the story of my village is mainly because like the original name Al Fasaqin was based on Al Fisq, and the best way you can look at it is the best way I can explain it is let's say bastards, right? The actual meaning of the word bastard, I think, is a child who doesn't know his father. But that's what Al Fasaqin was basically the people that were shunned from their villages, kind of gathered on that space, that land, which is now my village. And they kind of like hung out there and started building the village. And generation after generation, these people that were like assholes, like imagine Australia, because Australia was built on top of like all America as well. But Australia was based, a lot of the people that were imprisoned in Britain were sent to Australia. And so if you'd imagine like all the people that were not necessarily welcome in the surrounding villages were kind of like kicked out and they went and they started building their houses around that region. And as they evolved into their own culture, they evolved into their own like sense of values and all that stuff. And they changed because everyone changes. Like when I was like a teenager, I was an asshole. And everyone kind of like evolves and changes. But it used to be called fasaq, called it used to be called fasaqin, which means like the people of the land of the village of assholes, the people of assholeness. The people of indifference, whatever man. You want, it's a more of a poking, like you're being an asshole. It's more like you're being an asshole. So these guys that used to be like assholes named the village, and then after a while, the village was changed instead of Al Fasaqin, which means like the village of assholes, was translated into Al Basatin, which means the village of like gardens. And granted, it's a much prettier name. There are a million Al Basatins all over Lebanon. Like in almost every area has its own like couple of villages called Al Basatin because at one point everyone thought they were special. And I'm talking a couple of hundred years ago. Like people barely like moved. It took like 5 6 days to reach what takes us 2 days to 20 minutes to reach today. Any journey would be like a week, 2 week journey. And the people that travel never travel for like half an hour and come back. They spend 5 6 days somewhere and then they come back. So that is basically the scope of our evolution that I'm talking to you about. But the reason I mention it is because like a friend of mine was discussing like villages and was discussing something I remember about like how Lebanon is and what part of Lebanon we are. And I think a big part of me kind of like wanted to make a joke about like we can't the people living in Beirut, especially the people living in the areas that have pubs and coffee shops, are not really living in Lebanon. The reason I say that is because like what do the 1% know about like the rest of the states, the rest of like the country? And a friend of mine once mentioned it to me because like he was having a conversation with his brother, and his brother is a Wall Street was a stockbroker and investor. So his brother invested in a company that does something with like the sponsors NASCAR racing, and my friend was completely debating it because he was like, "Why would you do that? Nobody like watches NASCAR." And his brother was like, "You don't understand. 78% of America watches the races. Just because you don't watch it, that means you're out of touch with what's going on. Like the true reality is literally beyond what we can see and experience." And it was true because, like, what we might consider something, other people would completely not know and be clueless. Is like, how come you don't know? It's a lot of shit happens all the fucking time, but we kind of like get bottled up in our own realities. But saying that joke, what I ended up doing was telling the story about the village, and I was saying it in a more kind of like funky way because I refuse to call it Al Basatin, which is the gardens. I call it still the village of assholes. The reason I call it the village of assholes because I think like when we shy from our true nature, what really happens is it bites us and ends up biting us in the ass. And so the reason I say this is because the story, the way I told the story, kind of ended with them looking at me going like, "So that's why you're a rebel, because like, or just being rebellious, or an asshole, or just like making random jokes that are like maybe funky and inappropriate." And I laughed, but then I realized that I kind of was telling the story in a way that led to me being the descendant of assholes. So like I'm kind of like justified, and I'm holding true to like my lineage. Which is funny because I'm trying my best to kind of not be an asshole, but you never know when you are an asshole, right? You kind of have to have people go like, you're doing it again. The reason I'm telling you about this story is because I feel like every single thing about our life, our reality, is how we tell the story, how we express, how we elaborate on these smaller details, and how we allow ourselves to kind of like evolve through the timeline. And it changes our perception of it, changes our perception of history. But that repetition and the storytelling kind of like, that's why, well, that kind of builds the emotion differently towards that past. And so you see a lot of people that actually have like a heavy past that kind of like remember it in a bit of nostalgia. And even though it wasn't best of pasts, it kind of like passed. And because it passed, they kind of like found themselves, got over it. And the more they think about it, the more emotional they're attached to it. But that also is the reason why they became who they are. So what we do when we're telling these stories is we're building a stronger bond with these experiences. We're building a stronger bond with like whatever we look at as a part of our history and our reality. And what effectively we're doing is we're creating the emotions necessary for us to use them as a base, as a stepping stone for the future. Then when it comes to anything, right? Because like you're learning lessons, their experiences, they are all sorts of behaviors that you engaged in as you actually processed your way through days as life kind of like got better and better and better or different or changed or evolved or whatever it is. You literally are the story that everyone gets to tell. You are your life, your lifestyle is your own storyline. It's like your road on this earth, your dates on this earth, your timeline on this earth. It's your story, it's your journey, it's how you share that experience and the creativity in how you share it. The reason why I actually wrote it down, I think, is because I realized how strong it is when it comes to me and how I am using the storyline attitude in order for me to readjust my outlook, especially on the things that I have been like, I don't want to say struggling, but these are the things that I have been engaging with specifically on on different levels or from different angles in order for me to kind of go through and cross to a different side, like pass a certain threshold. And anytime I seem to kind of like drive a further distance, I notice that the story that I speak, that the actual expression towards these timings in my life and these subjects that are kind of like engaging with me and that I'm trying to engage with in different angles and different levels, they change in how I am talking about them, which effectively keeps like shifting how I see them. And then eventually they become a certain like story that I tell about a time where I actually was trying to achieve something, do something, or go through something. And it really all boils down to how good of a storyteller you are and how strong of a how strong of a storyteller you are, because the stronger you tell the story, the more believable it is, or the more, and when I say believable, you're literally telling a story so you could actually like express the solid truth that you want out of it. And if you're telling a story about how you're going through, how you went through things, or how you got over things, or how you passed from one country to another, or how you traveled, or how you had your coffee in the morning, all of these need to actually express the truth behind them. And building yourself requires a certain character that's able to tell that in order for you to be able to exist as a part of your storyline and for the world to be able to see that through you. That's a whole lot, man. But imagine the bonds that you're able to create and the moments you're trying to kind of like, you're able to connect, the thoughts and the ideas that you're like build around, all of them by going back to them and trying to say and repeating the story and adjusting it and tweaking it in order for you to see more, to extract more from it, to like give it some flavor or reveal its flavor. And by the end of the actual like experience with the 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 elements and the past and the experience that you had, your experience with your past, with your history becomes this beautiful story that's told, shared, and maybe eventually like, I don't know, taught. Most of what we learned, by the way, through history has been taught. It's stories that have been translated from time to time. So what I'm saying is perfectly valid. This is my story. All of you are witnessing it. Watch it happen and believe it to be true. Soon.